Sometimes I have cool things to wear for these reviews, and sometimes I don't. I'll let you decide which category this one falls into.
No spoilers ahead.
The Pale Blue Eye is a 2022-23 horror mystery thriller directed by Scott Cooper and starring Christian Bale and Harry Melling. The movie was released in select cinemas on December 23, 2022, before its Netflix release on January 6, 2023.
Some people thought The Pale Blue Eye was a soberly told gothic whodunit, and that's about as close as it got to a compliment. Other people thought it was a badly written, overacted murder mystery dud. Scooch in a minute, horror friends. Are any of you finding a lot of scary movies lately are lacking impact? Because I am, and I think there's a fairly simple reason for it. To me, it feels like a lot of modern scary movies are nailing the technical aspects, but the story itself is becoming an afterthought. Let's investigate The Pale Blue Eye's plot to see what we can deduce from the evidence ourselves. That's cutting off circulation to my head.
The plot.
The movie opens in 1830 when veteran detective Augustus Landor is called to investigate a murder at the West Point Military Academy in New York. And as Detective Landor's voice is Christian Bale blatantly impersonating Daniel Day-Lewis in his Oscar-winning performance in There Will Be Blood,
I'm beginning to believe you no longer think I'm competent.
I don't lose my tools in the hole and spend months fishing for them.
I'll be referring to him as Plainview for the rest of the plot summary. The military called him in to figure out how the hell one of their cadets ended up hanging from a tree with his heart ripped out. Plainview finds the remnants of a ripped up note in the victim's hand. And on learning this, a student at the academy who's a penchant for solving puzzles offers his assistance in investigating the case. And that student is Edgar Allan Poe. When they find a sheep and a cow with their hearts removed in a similar brutal fashion, Plainview decides to take Poe up on his offer, and the pair enter into a super secret partnership, kind of like social media and your government. In typical murder mystery fashion, one thing leads to another, and Plainview randomly finds a symbol carved into the floor of the local ice house, leading them to believe the killing might be linked to black magic. And now that the movie's about the occult, Plainview needs the advice of an occult expert. This movie's version comes in the form of Robert Duvall. Lucky for Plainview, Mr. Duvall's got everything he needs within arm's reach, including an incredibly rare book about witch hunting that explains exactly what might be going on. And then they find a second cadet left out in the wilderness also missing a heart, and that sends a third cadet running when he realizes he might be next by proxy. Plainview and Edgar Allan sleuth their way to the family of Dr. Marquis, who performed the initial autopsy. And at the good doctor's house, Edgar Allan meets Leah, the doctor's daughter, and he falls for her and turns all puppy dog in 9 seconds, like half the academy has. While they're out walking, he discovers the hard way she suffers from seizures, but she shakes it off and continues the walk right after it's done. And her strength inspires him to tell her he hears his dead mother's voice from time to time, which is a strange thing for a supposedly intelligent person to divulge on a first date. And whilst he's strolling home from the date, he's pounced upon by another cadet named Ballinger, who's also got a thing for the doctor's daughter. But Plainview appears magically from the fog in just enough time to save Poe from a proper beating. The following day, after Plainview spent the night with Charlotte Gainsbourg, who's in the movie for 21 seconds, they discover Poe's attacker, Ballinger, hanging in the forest castrated with his heart torn out too. And while they're examining the body, Timothy Spall tears into Plainview for his lack of progress with that shouting thing he does so well. And he infers Edgar Allan might be responsible for the killings. And Plainview's all like, "That skinny weirdo?" In lieu of the death, the dynamic duo are invited round to the doctor's house for dinner, because food is always a great way to cope with a ferocious ritualistic murder. And after dinner, the good doctor tells Plainview his daughter Leah's very sick and has been since she was a child. And as she's entertaining the guests on the piano, Edgar Allan goes all googly-eyed, even for him, and declares he'd do anything she wanted him to. And if you couple this declaration with his admission of hearing his dead mother's voice on their first walk, it really boggles the mind why she hasn't snatched him up already. While he's acting like a gangly 13-year-old, Plainview wanders through the house and pokes through drawers until he finds a cadet's uniform. And this sends him sprinting back to Robert Duvall in the mysterious book. And after leafing through it, even though it's in French and he doesn't speak it, he rushes back to the doctor's house with a fistful of supernatural accusations. And while the doctor's admitting his family's connection to the book and black magic, young Edgar's learning a lesson a lot of keen young men learn the hard way when they go after the village hot girl.
Unfortunately, Edgar, some of them are only interested in ripping your heart out.
Plainview shows up at the perfect time again, and they kick and punch and fight and scream, and the place catches on fire. So Plainview rescues Edgar Allan and Gillian Anderson's cartoon version of Margaret Thatcher before the burning barn collapses and kills Lee and her brother. With the case closed, everyone wishes Plainview well, and he heads home to find a heartbroken Edgar Allan waiting there to present the big twist ending. He's learned that Plainview's daughter isn't actually missing, but dead by her own hand, after being taken unconsensually by the cadets who wound up dead. Poe matched the handwriting found in the hand of the dead cadet to Plainview's note, making him the killer. They used the entire final 15 minutes of the film to summarize everything Plainview just did for the last hour and a half of the movie.
And there you have it, folks, the plot to The Pale Blue Eye. Now, I recognize and respect all the work that goes into making a movie, so I would never pass a simple binary judgment of good or bad on a film. Let's take a look at the good bits first, and I'll flesh out my thoughts a little bit.
When you watch a movie, it feels like words and pictures are presenting you a story, and they are. But those words and pictures are made up of a handful of equally important elements that all have to function in unison for a movie to work. The director evokes emotion in his audience by manipulating these elements.
Which elements are you talking about, you hat-changing weirdo? I'm glad you asked.
First, there's what we see in the frame, which includes the environment and the lighting and the costumes. The environment might show a door creaking open, or slow falling snow, or in the Pale Blue Eye's case, fog crawling over everything. The lighting plays a huge role in conveying what's in the frame, or of equal importance, what's not in the frame. Horrors and thrillers and mysteries utilize darkness to create tension. The costumes can draw attention or go completely unnoticed depending on the director's goals. The bright blue cadet uniforms in this movie do a mix of both by simultaneously attracting the eye and stripping the cadets of their individuality. All of these things are vital because it's a murder mystery. The fog obscures, and so does the lighting. When you're trying to pin down a suspect, making them all look the same means none of them stand out. The editing, which is the act of putting frames of a film together, is an art in itself. When it's done properly, you don't see it. That allows viewers to imagine the relationship between the connected scenes, and that makes the film experience a unique one for each of us.
But if it's done poorly, you cannot catch a bat with a pan. See what I mean?
In terms of scene-to-scene editing, Dylan Titchener did very well, as he should, given he's an award-winning editor. He kept the rhythm and built up the story environment. You could argue the whole thing went on too long, but that's probably down to the director's intentions versus Dylan's editing choices. And sound is another crucial element to a movie's success, especially with a gothic horror period piece. When you connect sound with imagery, it creates feeling. A lot of casual viewers, my younger self included, think of sound as a supporting element. But when you're trying to create an emotion in film, the manipulation of sound and silence is just as important as the images themselves. We've no time to get into sound theory, so I'll just say Howard Shore's soundtrack did the movie justice, as his soundtracks always do. Take Lord of the Rings, for example. Everything we've just discussed is technical, and so technically speaking, this movie is bang on. It felt like West Point, New York in the 1830s. The color tech nailed the frigid surroundings, so aesthetically, this movie looked the part. Same can be said for the acting. Director Scott Cooper brought in a slew of competent British actors knowing they'd have no problem handling the period language. You can drop Christian Bale, Harry Melling, Lucy Boynton, Timothy Spall, and Toby Jones into these roles, and as a director and audience member, you know they're gonna do a good job because we've seen them do it a million times. So, if this movie looks and sounds and feels and smells the way it should, what exactly am I complaining about?
The shite bits.
I've highlighted Pale Blue's technical proficiency in the last section, but it seems like the story itself got left behind, and that's something I am seeing a lot recently. In this specific case, you'd assume being adapted from Louis Bayard's best-selling novel would save-proof against exactly that, but here we are. This movie feels like a series of events unraveling in chronological order without any emotional depth or nuance driving them forward. Christian Bale's Detective Landor is brought in specifically for his abilities to detect, but he happens upon upon the clues the way they happen upon the bodies. As a lead character in a murder mystery, he recites his lines and solves the crime in the allotted time, but he's as intriguing as the snow on the ground. If you stand him up next to Benoit Blanc from Knives Out or Hercule Poirot from any number of other films, he's wildly boring by comparison because he's been written that way. And if you've seen Melling act as an adult, Buster Scruggs being a recent example, you know he's incredibly talented. In this movie, he too recited his lines perfectly and enunciated and postured. His timing was spot on, and he has an uncanny physical resemblance to the man himself. Poe's writing fascinates me, and I was excited to watch this movie. But I felt no more attachment to him than I did with Bale. As the story progresses beyond the midpoint, the ominous gothic tone they fought so hard to create dissipates instantly in the light of the final act's childishness. If that's not damning enough, instead of allowing the audience to piece Landor's guilt together themselves, Cooper stuffed Poe into a cramped cottage to spell out every absent millimeter of off-screen action in the previous hour. It was the kind of tactless expository dump you'd lay on an audience with learning disabilities. The real irony is he did it to make up for the saggy, meandering middle of his own story. Without an engaging, balanced story, all the technical elements are just shiny parts of a broken toy. Hollywood's cranking out movies with a clear quantity over quality agenda. While this means you'll always have something to watch, it also means you'll always have something to forget, which should make you question why you're spending time and money on them in the first place. So, should you watch The Pale Blue Eye if you haven't seen it? Or should you find the closest hanging corpse and stuff the Blu-ray into its chest?
I really wanted to like this movie. It's a mystery. It's macabre. People get their hearts ripped out in the name of black magic. It nearly brings a tear just thinking about it. If you have Netflix, you've already paid for it, but if you don't, save your time and money for something you're far more likely to remember, like laundry detergent or an apple. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and consider subscribing so we can do this again. Until next time, folks.
It's me, Johnny, from that thing you just watched. If you enjoyed it, go down there and smash me in the face to subscribe. And if you want to watch another thing, there's one right there. Do it!